Hello and welcome to Yorke on Games number 43. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher C. Yorke. I'm visiting professor in philosophy at the University of Croatia in Zagreb. So today we're going to be talking more about the philosophy of sports and games as a complement to the Secrets of Strixhaven League curriculum, the offerings among which have interestingly included book reports now. So it's getting more and more academic. To carry on with that theme, I have a special presentation for you today. It's called Sport Ethics in Nearby and Distant Possible Worlds. Before I can tell you what that's all about, I need to tell you what a possible world is. And for that, I turn to David Lewis. David Lewis has a philosophy we call modal realism. It's the idea, in brief, that all worlds that can exist, all possible worlds that is, do exist. There could be impossible worlds, right, where you have something that both exists and does not exist. It defeats logic itself and therefore can't exist. But most things which aren't self-contradictory can exist. Now, there are nearby and distant possible worlds. And nearby possible worlds are nearly identical to our own with minor alterations. For example, a world wherein everything is the same except that the United States didn't join World War I and all the sort of knock-on effects from that. And then distant possible worlds are wildly different to our own with major alterations. For example, canines become, through evolution or other means, the main sentient species on Earth and walk upright. That's pretty distant in terms of what we would consider possible in our world, but it's not impossible, right? It's not contradictory. Now that we have a good idea about what a possible world is, let's start to use this philosophy to throw some light on topics in sport and games. So here's what I'm going to say about how I'm going to use the idea of modal realism. I'm going to say that some possible worlds that are simpler than our own can serve as thought experimental analogies for this world. Now, in our world, arguments against doping in sports are typically based on either the physical, reputational harm to athletes, competitive unfairness, or sport integrity, what some people call the spirit of the game. In other words, that doping somehow ruins the activity of sport in and of itself. But I contend that if we can imagine a possible world wherein we could hypothetically resolve the issues surrounding doping, that this would give us a pro tanto reason to allow doping in our world, if we could create analogous conditions here. So I think that, one of the things that's interesting is that we tend to think that the world that we're in has to be the way that it does. And it does, but only contingently. By contingently, I mean things are the way they are in our world, mostly because of historical accident, right? And a few laws of physics thrown in. Now, as a matter of fact, right, or you can imagine that the world could be different. There's nothing that breaks the human mind about that possibility. And I think that by imagining other worlds, right, that are just almost unthinkable from our perspective, but not categorically unthinkable, we can have a more clear view of what our world might be like. So, in other worlds, we can imagine that enhancing substances cause no harm. They have no negative social stigma attached to them. Indeed, they are part of a healthy lifestyle, and they are abundant, avoiding issues of distributive justice. Because if enhancing substances are scarce, then making them available to all players of a sport becomes an issue. Now, I'm going to talk about two possible worlds here. One world is the world of Popeye, where the enhancing substance is spinach, and Superman, where the enhancing substance is sunlight. Now, I'm going to say that both spinach and sunlight, probably from our perspective, morally unobjectionable substances. We don't care, however, about how these substances work in their fictional worlds, right? They each have their own weirdo backstories, but it's comic book logic, and It's internally coherent in those universes, but we don't expect it to make sense for ours. The important thing is that in these worlds, these substances have these effects, and we're going to sort of take that at face value. Let's talk first about Popeye's world. So Popeye the Sailor Man is someone who uses spinach to gain super strength and super speed, punch people to the moon or into the ocean, etc. It's not clear exactly how the spinach works as an enhancing substance for Popeye. Obviously, when he's not enhanced, he's still strong enough to squeeze a can of spinach to the point where the spinach pops out of the top. Now, it's hard to say whether just touching spinach or consuming the spinach gives the effect of the super speed and the super strength. It seems like consumption is not necessary for these effects to be had by Popeye, because as soon as it touches his lips, he becomes stronger, physically changes into a more muscular version of himself. So I'd considered two possibilities in Popeye's world. The first is that Popeye is possessed of unique spinach responsive physiology, but then upon further investigation on Popeye the Sailorpedia, I think it's called, the fan site that describes all things Popeye, I soon discovered in my research that all human subjects in Popeye's world physically benefit from spinach. So in this world, spinach is possessed of unique human enhancement qualities, and maybe not even limited to humans, right? Some animals could hypothetically benefit from spinach use. All right, so let's talk about Popeye's nemesis, Bluto. They're always getting in fights, usually about olive oil, but really just they like to fight with each other. It seems that Bluto is always picking a fight with Popeye for some plot reason or another. So you might think that Bluto's just bigger, right? And if spinach affects all people in Popeye's world equally, then the only time that Popeye can win in a fight with Bluto is if Popeye is eating spinach and Bluto isn't. Every other possibility that we can map out has a Bluto wins result. Now, we could have a couple of solutions here if fairness was our goal, and if we wanted to mitigate the effects that unequal access to spinach has. We could give Bluto spinach, right? So if Bluto has spinach and Popeye has spinach, the effect is the same as if nobody has spinach. And of course, this is analogous to doping in professional sports today, right? In that if every athlete has access to the same sort of level of doping technology, then they will presumably negate any positive benefits that are enjoyed by other people who are doping when they aren't. That's kind of what we call the treadmill effect, right? The pressure to keep up in professional sports by doping. The other solution might be to keep them in different categories, I don't know, by weight, by power, however you want to slice them. So there are ways that we can address the unfair use of spinach in this world, but generally speaking, our moral intuitions about spinach aren't negative. Usually when it's used, we think it is a good and proper thing. In this world, though, we do have a bit of a cognate in the substance of methylphenidate, and this is known as Ritalin, it's a prescription drug to help people concentrate who have ADHD. Now, it can improve cognitive performance beyond normal function, and that's why reason that students and Magic players indeed sometimes take this in a non-prescription way. Even though it's dangerous, it speeds up your heart, it can kill you. You would think that non-prescription use would constitute doping or cheating in the kinds of like esports where intense concentration over long periods of time is required. So should spinach be a controlled substance in the same way that Ritalin might be in some contests? Another way to phrase this question is Popeye a spinach doper or cheat? So spinach doping is voluntary since spinach is not ubiquitous in this possible world. It's not like oxygen, right? Oxygen is ubiquitous. We can't take oxygen out of an athletic contest, but surely we could take spinach out if we thought it was advisable to do. Now, spinach availability could be an issue for distributive justice if its availability is scarce and if its use confers an advantage. However, right, as I mentioned previously, if you look up on the Popeye, the Sailorpedia, or whatever the fan site is, you'll see that, everybody has as much spinach as they want anytime they want it, olive oil and the baby sweet pea, and just, the world is filthy with spinach. It seems to be one of the main plot contrivances, and anybody can do anything they want when they're on it. So it does seem like the playing field is level in terms of spinach availability. So it looks like distributive justice won't be an issue for spinach here. But is it a problem for the so-called spirit of sport? So I'm going to talk a little bit about perfectionism, which is a position that I'm writing a book about currently. It's the idea that the expression of uniquely human capacities is the source of moral value in the world. And this is arguably distinct from Aristotelian virtue ethics or eudaimonism more generally, since the focus is on the development of specific capacities rather than virtues more abstractly, and the good life as a whole takes a causal backseat to the goods of capacity expression. So what this does is it makes our moral position less vulnerable to critique on the grounds of metaphysical promiscuity. So when you talk about something like virtues, you can say, well, what are virtues, and what are the hierarchy between the virtues, and what does all that mean? When really we can all agree on what capacity expression is. So I am expressing a human capacity right now in talking to you. That's a morally valuable activity. And there's no metaphysics really that messes that up. So perfectionism is a sort of metaphysicked Aristotelian virtue ethics. What has this got to do with sports and games, you may ask? Well, there's a Canadian philosopher called Bernard Suits, and when he was writing in the 80s, he wrote that sports are cultural technologies, more or less, that give us reasons to develop unique human capacities that would normally find no other venue of expression. You might consider, again, the high jump, right? Without this sport, contemporary humans have very little, if any, reason to jump, or at least jump skillfully and well. In other words, the institution of high jumping gives us the requisite framework to make cultivating this capacity intelligible. If there is no event called the high jump, then we don't really have any reason to jump. Like, who among you has jumped today? I haven't jumped today. There has been no reason to. But then again, I'm not interested in the high jump and competing in it. If I was, I would have reasons to jump, and there are reasons to record the highest height that a human has ever jumped to, right, as a species achievement. So there are moral goods that come from jumping and from recording jumps, and this is part of what makes sport good. So let's talk about the use of spinach from the point of view of perfectionism. You might say that spinach is good, and it's not bad either. So what is good, according to perfectionism, is something that creates, develops, or enables capacities, and something that's bad, according to perfectionism, would be something that inhibits, reduces, or destroys capacities. Now, it seems that spinach is all upside in Popeye's world, right? Nobody's suffering from spinach overdose. No one's suffering from spinach withdrawal. There are only positive physical and regenerative effects of taking spinach, right? And so it looks like everything that we can worry about from a perfectionist point of view in terms of spinach use is morally okay. So what does that tell us? It tells us that maybe if we think about the use of spinach in Popeye's world, we can also think about, if we had a substance like this in our world, if it could be proved to exist, then we might have reason to support events like the Enhanced Games that's happening later this month in Las Vegas. So the enhanced games, has this promise that they're going to use only substances that don't harm the athletes, either in the short term or long term, right? That are only going to have positive effects to their performance, and they're going to make these substances available to all competitors, right? So if that's the case, then the only thing we have to worry about is stigma. Now, there could be some reputational damage to using negatively stigmatized substances. Spinach obviously lacks that status in Popeye's world. Its use is absolutely considered morally okay. Other kinds of performance enhancers in our world, I think, don't enjoy the same kind of status that spinach does in Popeyes. But if we could take away the social stigma from a substance or discover a new substance that lacks that stigma, then there wouldn't be any sort of at least moral or philosophical reason to object to humans using it, generally speaking. And again, as long as our regulations in enforcing doping bans are imperfect, then the logic of the enhanced game says, well, we might as well let everybody use these substances because at least some will be and they won't be caught. So just to make sure that we have a fair competition, give it to everybody. Now, you might think, well, this is an interesting conclusion to come to. Should we all be doping all the time? Well, there might be reasons not to. Let's discuss those next. Let's talk about Superman, another cartoon character from the 1930s that I'm sure that we're all familiar with. So we have Superman, who has also super strength and super speed, much greater than Popeye's, and this is activated by exposure to our so-called yellow sun in this solar system, because apparently under a red sun, like in his solar system, he has normal human strength. So really it's his physiology. He has yellow sun responsive physiology because he's from the planet Krypton, and for some reason that makes him super powerful in our world. Okay, so we know enough about Superman. We can move on from that. I think everyone knows how it works. Just anecdotally, there's a storyline in the Supergirl comics where she goes off to worlds with red suns so that she can actually experience being inebriated, because her body regenerates too quickly to experience the effects of intoxication in this solar system. So that's kind of an interesting kind of doping down situation. All right, so just like we looked at Popeye's spinach, we also have to look at sunlight in the Superman world. It looks like it does no direct harm. It looks like it invokes no stigma. It's freely available to everybody. It has positive health benefits, especially for Superman, but I think everybody benefits from a little sunshine, certainly. And there's negligible risk to long-term health. Now, there are, of course, examples where if you bake yourself in the sun for long periods of time, you have a risk of developing melanoma or skin cancer. That's not advisable, but moderate exposure to sunlight is good for everyone. It's just very good for Superman. Now, what's interesting about the buff that our sun gives Superman is that everywhere else, he's just a regular guy. It's only here that he's special. So on the left, we have a sort of, I think it's a Silver Age comic of Superman competing in the Interplanetary Olympics, and he's getting chumped by other aliens who are stronger in their world. Even one of them's even doing the Superman trick of breaking the chains with his chest, and Superman's really struggling. But when he gets to Earth, he can even outrun Flash, supposedly the fastest man alive. So it's a locational and physiological. It's a locational factor or affordance that gives him the physiological edge over other competitors. So let's talk about that a little bit more. It seems like every animal that exists on Earth also exists on Krypton, and somehow found their way to Earth, and then also becomes super. So it's not just a one species thing. It's like everything from Krypton has a competitive edge over every other, cognate life form on Earth. So what do we do? Do we consider Superman to be a sun doper or a cheat, right? It seems that sun doping is largely involuntary since sunlight is largely ubiquitous in this possible world, right? So it's an unintentional kind of discovery of Superman's that he's super strong when he gets here as a baby. It's surprising, presumably it's as surprising to him as it is to anyone else. So there's again, like I said, there's uniquely powerful affordance that Kryptonian physiology experiences when it's in this specific geographical, but maybe geographical is the wrong word here. It's probably better to say cosmic location. So do we consider something that's involuntary and accidental to be a kind of doping? Well, it's certainly not arguable that there's no effect given by sunlight, and that it does give Superman an incredible edge over humans. So you might think that in the hypothetical Olympics that allows for Kryptonians, Superman will, dominate every event. So what does that do to the spirit of sport according to perfectionism? I owe this point to Irina Martinkova in a conversation. She said, well, look, in a world with Superman, sport has no value, and it would even be meaningless for Superman himself, right? So every other competitor would be disincentivized to take part in a Kryptonian inclusive Olympics, and even Superman would probably find it absolutely pointless, right? So because of this certainty of victory, then the Olympic Games would no longer be games at all, categorically, or at least not good ones, which means that people wouldn't bother to play in them anymore and stop developing their capacities to qualify and compete. This would be a perfectionist bad, right? Because remember that what makes things good in the perfectionist world is when people develop their capacities, but there's no point of developing those capacities if there's no live contest to be had. So they might think of some solutions. None of these seem incredibly compelling. Create a separate category for Kryptonians to compete in Earthling sport events, or allow Superman to dope down by exposure to kryptonite, the sort of green substance that comes from his world, and sort of brings him back down. In fact, lower than normal functioning. It makes him positively sick. Should we ban him from competing in all yellow sun solar systems, or is there some other elegant solution that we could introduce to the situation to make Superman's competition unproblematic? It's tough one to solve. So that leads me to my other conclusion, right? So I agree with Irena that, having Superman compete in human Olympics would destroy the sport, destroy all sports he participated in. So we should withdraw support from events like the Enhanced Games if there is a substance in this world which exists like the yellow sun and Superman's. In other words, it has a uniquely powerful physiological effect on only particular individuals, and then deforms or eradicates all meaningful competition. So what I'm saying here is that if it all depends on the substances that are out there, and I'm neither a chemist or a physiologist or a doctor, a medical doctor, so I can't speak to this. But what I can say is that categorically, if we have substances in the world like Popeye spinach, where everybody gets stronger by taking it, there's no negative effects, then you might as well allow everyone to have spinach before they compete. There's no problem. There's no moral problem there. But if there's a substance that unfairly affects a subclass of people or just one person, then we do have reason to not support that substance being used. And if that's made available, it creates competitive unfairness. So let's say that I'm particularly receptive to spinach or sun and nobody else is, then we should have reason to exclude spinach or sunlight exposure from these events if they have these deforming effects. that's roughly it for the day. I hope that this has been, informative to you, and maybe makes you think about what kind of buffs you enjoy and whether they're fair. Do you enjoy a cup of coffee before your magic games? Are you taking a prescription drug or a non-prescription drug? Right? Are you trying to meet ordinary function of other people? Or are you trying to exceed it? These are the kinds of questions I think that we need to ask ourselves as game players, and if you are an athlete, as an athlete as well. Thank you for your attention. This concludes episode 43 of Yorke on Games. I'll be back later on in the semester with more philosophy for you. Class is over.